Forged by the Apocalypse by M.T. Conboy. Chapter 1. The Shift. If there was one universal truth each and every being would say applied to themselves, it would be this. If something can go wrong, it will. Every being in existence does everything it can to mitigate this risk in every way they can, even down to how they evolved. Eventually, everything becomes a crab or a slime. What I'm trying to say is that I wasn't particularly surprised that the apocalypse descended in the moments before I finally graduated from university. 12 years of standard education, rolling right into 7 years of much more expensive medical training. It'd be easy enough to see the benefits of a surgeon in the apocalypse, but immensely less so for psychiatry. They'd need me afterwards, I joked, as I sprinted as far as I could from St. Gerard's University. We'd all received the same insane message in our heads at the same time, but not everyone was reacting like me. They were all in shock, but I couldn't afford that. I needed to get home. All at once, the whole university and, I'm assuming, the planet received an ominous warning. The end of the beginning starts in 30, a sonorous voice intoned, causing immediate halt to all proceedings and a lot of screaming. It was easy enough to figure out we had all heard the same thing when people started talking. 30 what? The most common and the most important question. When the voice returned, not quite a minute later, and droned a simple 29, the confusion only increased. People were looking around desperately for someone who could give them an answer, but there just wasn't one. A few other people started to look increasingly disturbed. Panic was setting in. I was already leaving. Where are you going? Bless her heart, Professor Daniels was holding my diploma out to me, still. I had been next to receive the degree, but obviously it didn't matter now. Either I was completely insane and my psychiatry career was over before it began, or the world had gone insane. We'd see what that meant for me career-wise, if I survived. 28. Ah, piss off, I shouted. Even though she had heard the voices too, the doddering woman looked offended. Hopefully I would get the chance to apologize, but how could it matter? I sprinted off the stage and made for the exit. Luckily, because of my haste and the relative spotlight on me, most people in attendance were too stunned to crowd the aisle yet. 27. This particular announcement coincided with the deep ringing of the school bell. An actual bell with a belfry. Someone was diligent, I thought, as I made a beeline for the front doors of the university. The bell required a physical pull on a heavy rope to sound. I shook my head. British people, I muttered under my panting breath. The chaos had started at this point, and my lungs were full of sharp blades. I cycled every now and then, but I was by no means in peak physical shape. I wanted to kick myself, but I could hardly have expected some weird magical Armageddon to descend. The sky seemed to have been informed it was time to be dramatic, and rumbling red clouds were beginning to appear in the sky. Though still not entirely convinced I wasn't hallucinating, it was becoming more and more clear something serious was happening. Home was a small 2-bedroom house about 3 miles from the school. The hour or so it took to walk in the morning was scenic, taking me through an idyllic English suburb and park. Those pretty houses and lovely lanes were just obstacles now. What's going on? A vice grip literally stopped me in my tracks. I was stunned to see the ancient face of Mrs. Nabel looking straight into my eyes. Her milky white sockets were useless, I had thought. The intensity in those blank eyes was almost as terrifying as the 26, which the deep voice intoned. There were people in disarray all around, and I saw everyone flinch. Everyone but Mrs. Nabel, that is. "The hell are you made of?" I asked under my breath. "I'm not sure, Mrs. Nabel, but I don't think it's good. You should get home." I tried to pull myself out of her way, but her grip was intense. I also didn't try too hard. I closed my eyes and sighed at myself. What am I doing? "Can I get you somewhere safe quickly?" "You're the Kaeron boy, aren't you?" I was pretty sure that Mrs. Nabel was older than the original Sin. She could often be seen in the various warm places around, getting a coffee and trying to find someone to talk to. I had taken the time to chat on a few occasions, which I was glad for right now. We needed to get somewhere safe, if that existed anywhere. "That's right, Grant Kaeron. Will you walk with me?" She wasn't letting go, and I couldn't blame her. Blind, quiet, and tiny, what chance did she have if the world fell apart and no one helped her? I would grab the first person I could too. She nodded, and I flinched as the voice boomed again. 24. Jesus criminy, I frowned. Best not to throw powerful names around in vain right now. "You're hearing that too? Come on, let's get somewhere warm at least." Despite the promise of summer around the corner, this particular week in May had been frigid as a witch's tit. Mrs. Nabel had grabbed me as I passed an alley leading to a local park. There was a cafe within where I could leave her without too much guilt. The voice told us another segment of time passed away. At around 50-second intervals, I judged that there were less than 20 minutes left. I could still make it, taking the short walk to catch my breath. "Always knew this would happen," Mrs. Nabel muttered strangely, still vice gripped to my sleeve. 22. I didn't have the time to think about anything but getting free of the old dear. Still, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I just pulled free. Honestly, I wasn't sure I could. Crazy old lady strength. "We're nearly at Clive's. Is Sandra working today, do you think?" My studies kicked in. Keep talking about the mundane and fear can't set in. Everyone in the room jumped as I opened the door. The voice spoke at the same time. We received accusatory looks, as though it were our fault. "Sorry," I winced. Luckily, I didn't need to do much explaining as the owner came flapping over. Her husband Clive had passed away a few years ago, but the name of the business stuck. Like a mother hen, Sandra covered the elderly woman with her shawl. She released me, and I turned for the not yet closed door behind me. 20. Integration initiated. The door fell into my hand. Expecting physics to follow the rules I was used to, I was unprepared for the weight it swung closed with. Like it had been shoved shut with a huge finger, I was thrown back by the force. With presence of mind, I blocked my head with my left hand just before I collided with a nearby wall. Keeping myself conscious was all well and good, but it meant the pain in my shoulder was inescapable. I screamed even as someone began to crowd me. Hey kid, look at me. Don't look at your arm, look at me." I found it hard to focus, but I managed to lock on to a pair of watery blue eyes. The man had short salt and pepper stubble and a red ruddiness in his bulbous nose. "This is crazy, right?" Everything hurt. "Yeah," I mumble. I hoped that agreeing with him would be enough and that he would leave me alone, but he didn't. He asked a few more rapid-fire questions. Did I go to the university? Yup. Had I tried the sandwiches on sale here? Most lunch times I got free, yes sir. Could I take a deep breath? Well, sure, watch. 19. As the voice boomed in my ear, and I took my breath, the man yanked my arm. It was like he pulled my consciousness back from the brink. The fog in my mind was blasted apart, and suddenly I was back in the room. Ow, I moaned. Yeah, that'll sting all right. The man stood up. I'd seen him around over the years, but we'd never had reason to speak before. Can you get up? His outstretched hand felt like a taunt as I gripped my right shoulder to stem the pain. I grunted and grabbed his arm with my left hand, letting myself be pulled to my feet. It felt like my back was being shredded against barbed wire. Now it was my turn to look at the door with accusation. Why had it swung back so hard? What the fuck is going on? Though I barely whispered the question to myself, Sandra's head snapped my way so hard her earrings clattered. I smothered an eye roll and turned my expression apologetic before gesturing my head to my shoulder. Struggling to be polite, I felt frustration rise as the source's voice spoke again. 18 by 50 was 900. 15 minutes. I wasn't sprinting anywhere with my shoulder like this. Innocent as anything, I walked back up to the door. Once I was close, the rage I felt came forth, and I planted my foot near the handle and pushed. Every action gets an equal reaction, according to Newton, but the whiplash this time felt disproportional. Luckily, nothing dislocated, but I fell back into the cafe where multiple worried and confused faces glared at me. Oh, like you were just enjoying a nice picnic before we came in. Mrs. Nabel had been ushered to a chair and was seated with a look of deep consternation on her face. The pain in my shoulder had flared, but I gritted my teeth and got to my feet. 17. Someone screamed. The pressure was mounting with each passing moment. People were bound to buckle eventually. In fact, I probably looked pretty frantic after nearly breaking myself on the front door twice in as many minutes. The scream had come from a bespectacled woman who brandished her laptop with 2 hands over her head. Get away from me! No one had been approaching, but they definitely weren't now. It's okay. Calm down. The man who had relocated my shoulder spoke in an almost bored drawl. The scene's already been made, love. No one needs you getting all crazy too. Me? Crazy? That boy's the only one doing anything. We need to get out of here. I shrank into a seat near the still frowning Mrs. Nabel. Don't single me out. I'm not on your side. A few looks my way were met with as close to a shrug as I could manage. I was done trying to shove my way out, at least. Someone else could come up with a plan. The laptop lady and the helpful man continued having a back and forth, but just like he had with me, the older man was trying to keep a lid on the situation. It wasn't working nearly as well with laptop lady, however. As the voice called out 16 until the beginning of the end, whatever that meant, she only became more frantic. Get us out! Despite the seriousness of my own injuries, which I felt a little disconnected from, it was easy to find the situation absurd rather than frightening. A mysterious voice was counting down to something unknown, and I was stuck in a cafe with a bunch of strangers. The front doors were blocked by some inexplicable means, and no answers were forthcoming. Frustrated and scared, the woman got a running start and threw her laptop as hard as she could at a window. Intending to follow it out, I imagine she was quite surprised when a similar effect to the door caused the laptop to fling back towards her. I never learned her name. The laptop might have given me an answer if I were inclined to search, but things got rather hectic rather quickly after that. Much like the door had suddenly seemed to weigh 100 times its norm, and my kick rebounded with astounding force, the laptop ricocheted like a hard plastic bullet. It disappeared from view. The crash behind my head was followed by a slap of wind. Everything happened all at once. I reached up to my face, where the wind had slapped me. My fingers came away bloody. Panicking, I turned and saw the laptop smashed, half buried in the brick wall. "Huh?" the woman asked. That was all I heard before the screaming started again. It wasn't her this time, and the older man who had helped before joined in the chorus as people saw what had occurred. I did have a small cut on my cheek, but there was blood all over my forehead too. I returned my gaze to the woman just in time to see her fall. Her top half fell, that is. Her legs gruesomely remained standing for another few seconds before the knees buckled. I barely heard the evil voice in my head say 15. Blood pooled quickly. I absently noticed that much more blood was flowing from the top half than the lower. There wasn't much I could do about the shock at this point. Simply too many things had conspired at once. I was supposed to graduate today. I chuckled. Mrs. Nabel turned to me. I quickly grabbed the napkin on the table to get the splatter of blood from her face. "So it's really happening?" she asked. My heart broke a little. Mrs. Nabel didn't have any clue what was going on, and now she was just surrounded by screaming. "Lots of bad stuff is happening." "What do you mean, Mrs. Nabel?" "The system has come for Earth." "What system?" My head was still swimming, but something pulled me into this moment. Despite the horror going on in the cafe, this felt more important right now. There was nothing I could do for either half of Glass's lady. Maybe I could help the people screaming, but I wasn't focusing on them. 14. Oh, shut up. Can you not hear that, Mrs. Nabel? Each time the voice spoke, it was louder than the time before. Deep, bassy, and terrifying. Mrs. Nabel was the only person who didn't react to its countdown. She hadn't reacted once, now that I actively tried to think about it. She smiled, a gentle smile, discordant somehow with the drama behind her. The air around us became noticeably calmer, the sounds of useless triage muted. "This isn't my first go-around, Grant." She raised a hand to my cheek and I found myself unable to move away. My body was paralyzed. "And I'm not looking for another." "I don't understand," I said dumbly. The confusion only grew as the sounds around us got even quieter. Somewhere in the mumble, I heard the ominous voice whisper the word 12. Astonished, I watched Mrs. Nabel's eyes clear. As though her cataracts had never stolen the sight, she looked at me. 2 vibrant amethyst eyes burned into mine. Their intensity was greater than the sun, yet I couldn't look away. Around the purple orbs of power, Mrs. Nabel's face became apologetic. "I'm truly very sorry for this." What? My mind was bitch-slapped like a train had been shoved up my nostril. All senses except touch disappeared. I felt all of my muscles snap into positions they were not meant to move. I could feel nothing but my own body's movement. I screamed in terror, but had no idea if I was actually making the noise. The horrible, locked-in feeling of having no control over my body was harrowing. I could almost feel various parts of my psyche being branded by the experience, though in the moment all I could truly feel was fear. What's happening to me? Mrs. Nabel? Sandra? Anyone? As suddenly as the world disappeared, it returned. I could taste blood. My fingers were sticky, and all of my muscles felt heavy. I was breathing like I'd run a marathon, or more appropriately, gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight. What the fu— I stopped, talking, my throat apparently shredded. Maybe from my screaming. Sight was the final sense to return. I hadn't noticed that I could hear the room because it was so quiet, but I heard my own voice and the coughing thereafter. "It's not fair," came a voice to my right. I jolted, and my muscles reminded me that we were in quite a lot of pain right now. Such movements were not allowed. I groaned and fell onto my back with a splash. At that point, the blood was impossible to ignore. My mind had done its best, but reality forced its way into my perception whether I liked it or not. And I definitely did not like it. The walls were covered in blood. There was no sound because everyone had been torn apart. Like the room was secretly a giant blender which I had somehow avoided. Everyone else was ripped to pieces by an unknown attacker. I looked down at my own destroyed hands with numb, dreadful understanding. Finally, I looked down into the ankle-deep pool of blood. How many was it? 12? 11, I think. Glasses lady was already dead. Grey, wiry hair was matted with the crimson clotting of the cafe-goer's blood. Her yellowing cardigan and brown knee-length skirt were stained black with it. "It's not fair," Mrs. Nabal repeated. "One." The voice shook the world, forcing me to plunge my ruined hands into the blood for stability. The countdown was already over. Had I missed other statements after the last? I guessed it didn't matter. "What's not fair?" I stared into her gemstone eyes. I was pretty sure the world was ending. I had also probably gone insane, and it certainly seemed like I had killed a room full of people. I might as well humor the old lady at this point. "What the system does to people is cruel. Good people don't survive long. Ever." Her eyes still seared into my own with unexplainable energy, and I felt that very energy grasp hold of my mind. It was the same as before my blackout. Maybe I had gained some kind of resistance to the control. Not enough, unfortunately. 0. System online. Good luck. As the countdown finished, Mrs. Nabal used her strange powers to move my limbs. I watched in confusion and then nauseous horror as my hands wrapped around her neck. One fierce squeeze, only a moment of strength, and the light was snuffed from her eyes. The control was immediately removed and I threw myself backwards away from the body. Ding! Level up! There was a new voice in my head now, and it shouted the words happily. Then it happened again, and again. Then something finally seemed to break because the volume jumped a magnitude, the words becoming a jumbled mess. Level, achieve title, unlock new quest levels up. Would you like to level up to loot Naborosax? Level up, Gone Slayer. Equip, inventory, level up. The world was nothing but blood, loud noises, and an altogether indescribable feeling, somewhere between being hungry and inflating like a balloon. I slipped on the blood as I tried to take a shaky step towards the front door. As I fell, my head clipped the corner of the table. The questions and sounds from the system kept coming. Yeah, I mumbled, my mouth unable to form any other words. Yeah. End of chapter 1. Thank you for listening. You can find this story in a much more completed text-based state on Royal Road, with even more released on Patreon. You can find links in the description. Please leave a like if you enjoyed my attempt at an audiobook. Subscribe if you're interested in Forged by the Apocalypse, and most importantly, have a great day.